Welcome, everyone, to the April 11th, 2025 episode of On Iowa Politics. This week on the podcast, the D-Trip is coming to Iowa, catfish noodling, and some interesting stories from Jared out in Sioux City. Hello, everyone. I'm Erin Murphy, the Des Moines Bureau Chief for the Gazette in Cedar Rapids. With me this week, our Gazette Deputy Bureau Chief, Tom Barton. Hello, Tom.
Hello, Erin.
We have lead Des Moines Bureau Chief Maya Marchel Hoff. Hello, Maya.
Hey, Erin.
And Jared McNett of the Sioux City Journal obviously is with us. Hello, Jared.
To all of the panicky On Iowa Politics shareholders out there, stay strong. Stay strong.
We'll bounce back.
Diamond hands.
And don't retaliate. We're going to start this week with a political block. That's right. It's the On Iowa Politics podcast's first real discussion of the 2026 elections, I think, right? Unless I'm forgetting one. Okay, good. We'll go with it. And boy, am I excited about that. Painful sigh here. Anyway, the political arm of the U.S. House Democrats, aka the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, or the DCCC, announced this week its plan to invest in 3 of Iowa's 4 U.S. House elections in 2026. The fact that National Democrats plan to target Eastern Iowa's 1st District and Central Iowa's 3rd District, and Republican incumbents Marionette Miller Meeks and Zach Nunn, respectively, is not terribly surprising. Those are almost always swing districts. But the addition of the 2nd District and GOP incumbent Ashley Hinson was a little surprising to me. Maybe not as surprising is the fact that I got those 1st and 2nd districts correct this time without having them backwards, which I almost always do. Tom, you cover Iowa too more than I. Were you also surprised that the D-Trip plans to throw resources into that election?
I do, considering they didn't direct resources toward it this last election cycle in 2024. And, you had a relatively unknown Democratic candidate running against at the time, a 2-term incumbent, now a 3-term incumbent, who, was fairly well known in the district, and seems to be fairly popular in Northeast Iowa. And so that Democratic candidate in 2024, didn't do well, ended up, I hate to say it, but for lack of a better term, got smoked by Ashley Hinson. In the previous cycle, in the 2022 cycle, you had a more well-known Democratic candidate who was more established, better funded, and had resources from the DCCC, former Iowa state lawmaker Liz Mathis, who also lost pretty handily to Ashley Hinson. Granted, that was a much closer race, but still ended up losing with DCCC support. And so, yeah, it was surprising to see the 2nd district included in that list. Obviously, everyone was expecting the 1st and 3rd congressional districts to be included just because of how close those races were. This last election cycle, Iowa Republican U.S. Representative Marionette Miller Meeks, who represents the 1st district, squeaked it out, ended up winning by just about 800 votes. Against Iowa City Democrat Christina Bohannon. We also saw a close race between Zach Nunn and Lennon Bacam in the 3rd district. And, those were races that National Democrats, House Democrats, had targeted and spent a lot of money on those races, a lot of ads. And, while they were ultimately unsuccessful, again, brought those races, fairly close. It is interesting to see the 2nd district, especially considering at least I have not up until this point really heard a lot of names, floated out there as to who might challenge Congresswoman Ashley Hinson. It speaks to the vulnerabilities that Democrats see for Republican congressional incumbents in this upcoming midterm, and are kind of I guess from what I could tell from this, banking on voter frustration at what we're seeing from the Trump administration and from Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency and all of the federal funding cuts, the uncertainties with Trump's tariffs and, how that's played out in the stock market this week and what that's going to do to Iowans' retirement accounts, to their pensions, to their 401ks, to their savings, et cetera. And I guess it speaks to the fact that, I guess Democrats feel that they can, tie Ashley Hinton to that, and that is end up going to be a liability for her running this next election cycle. But there's a lot of time between now and November of 2026. So we'll see how that pans out for them, and we'll see what kind of candidates emerge to challenge her.
Yeah, I was gonna say it feels like this is all based on the hope of what could happen given the national sentiment and
Right.
and that I suspect Democrats are looking at 2018 that's what they're hoping, that it's a similar electorate to that, which was Trump's first midterm, the first time he got elected, and there was Abby Finkenauer and Cindy Axne both won congressional races in that election.
Yeah, I think that it's all based on that, and they're looking at the district and seeing that it's more of a purple district than say Iowa's 4th congressional district, right? Which they didn't include in this list.
I'm shocked by that.
Right? solidly Republican. Very much conservative. More so than the 2nd district. And I think, I don't know, I would have to pull up the latest voter registration numbers for the 2nd district, but just based off of my recollection from the last election cycle in 2024, Republicans, I believe, have an advantage, but I think that it's fairly small. It's not as substantial, obviously, as the advantage that you have in the 4th congressional district. I think, it's roughly a third, roughly a third registered Republican, roughly a third registered Democrat, and then, roughly a third registered no party voters, with kind of a smattering of libertarians included in there.
Since Iowa is the Florida of the North, even though it's
Where do we talk about this?
Even though it's always dangerous doing comparisons of House races, especially for different states. It is worth noting, the special elections that were in the Florida House districts last week. There was a 15 and 16 point swing for the 2 races down there towards the Democrats. They both still lost, but and it's a special election, which Democrats do better in now than Republicans. But if you see anywhere close to that in 2026, then it would make sense why Democrats are spending, even in places that in the past would have seemed more of a slog.
Yeah, and to that, and we all, as Jared already did, and say it again, we always give the caveats about projecting too much out of special elections, but it's the evidence, the very scant evidence that we do have, and in Iowa too, with the state house elections, special elections that we've seen so far, Democrats flipped one seat in southeast Iowa, and then Republicans held another one, but by a much smaller margin than how the county went, how the district went in the presidential election. So there's those little morsels of optimism that Democrats are feeding off of, and perhaps part of the reason why, amongst all those other things listed, that we're going to see the D trip in Iowa again. And I suppose you could probably find a percentage of Iowa Democrats who would question whether or not that's a good thing, but they're coming anyways. So, Jared, let's stick with you as we move on here. You had a couple of interesting things to write about this last week. Let's make the segue as seamless as possible and start with some national politics and a rally that you covered. And this was part of a network of rallies that were happening all across the country last weekend, right? And so there were ones in Cedar Rapids and Iowa City as well. There was one here in Des Moines, but obviously in Western Iowa, that's always a little interesting to watch how essentially what is effectively an anti-Trump rally and how that played in Western Iowa. So what did that look like, Jared?
Actually, it was 2 rallies that I ended up covering, one on Friday and one on Saturday. On Friday, my colleague Caitlin and I, we covered a protest that started over in South Sioux City, Nebraska, and then it went across the Missouri River into Sioux City to the federal courthouse. And that event, that one was actually organized locally. Well, they were both organized locally, but that one wasn't really a part of the national stuff on Saturday. That one was organized in part by Jessica Lopez Walker, who ran for the Iowa House District 2 seat in 2024. And that one had a few dozen people come out, at least for the stretch that we covered, which was like the initial stretch. And yeah, a lot of the signs had slogans kind of addressing Trump. You had Orange Lives Matter, Dump Trump, Trump is terrifying.
Oh, clever.
Yeah,
clever.
yeah, they had that with like 3 Fs though. I'm not sure why they had so many Fs. But
Okay.
and then there was one that was like a topical kind of sign saying "Bring Kilmar home," which is a reference to Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland father that CBS said was mistakenly deported to a prison in El Salvador. There wasn't a lot of kind of conflict at all with that one. The only thing I observed was at one crosswalk, there was a woman in a car who yelled, "Shame on you," at some protesters, but that was about it. And then, yeah, Saturday, I had 2 different things I was covering. I'll talk about the other protests first. The second protest brought out several hundred people, between 200 and 300, is about what me and former On Iowa Politics podcaster Brett Hayworth, who was also covering the event, that's what we said when comparing notes in terms of how many people were there roughly. And yeah, that event was one that was kind of part of the nationwide rallies that were in all 50 states. Some of those events were aided by Indivisible, which is a progressive group. And as I was kind of joking about earlier, that fact alone led to plenty of commenters locally here saying that the event was astroturfed, which we've talked about before, and being familiar with what happened in 2010. It always makes me smile when I see people convinced that something doesn't have any organic support, because playing a dangerous game there if you convince yourself of that. But yeah, all of the folks I talked with were local. So if people were being brought in from Des Moines or somewhere else, I missed it. One of the folks I talked to was a semi-truck driver. And when I asked him why he was out, he was very blunt, and he said, "I'm tired of it. I'm mad." And yeah, that event, I should note, brought out several folks who recently ran for office as Democrats. Ryan Melton, who we mentioned a little bit ago, Lopez Walker, who I mentioned before, and then Emma Buza, who ran in Iowa House District 3 against Tom Gennari. And I guess I just took note of that because you don't necessarily always see candidates kind of showing up earlier on in the process of like a movement kind of thing. Sometimes it takes them a little while longer maybe to show up when things are a little more like solid and you've seen a few events in a row, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was the protests that I covered. And I didn't check to see how many other places in Iowa had them. I know Mason City did, and you mentioned the ones in your all's parts of the state too.
Yep. I went to the one in Cedar Rapids. We had one that day in Iowa City as well as Mount Vernon and Lisbon. Those are the ones I can recall immediately off the top of my head. And then there was also one in the Quad Cities in Davenport, plus Des Moines
and the Des Moines
Ames.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jared, I don't know how much you have to draw on for comparison's sake. A couple to 300 people for an event like that. Is that standard? Is that unusually high? Are you able to kind of context that for us?
It actually probably size-wise is not too different from what we had a couple years ago when there were protests after Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Okay.
Which is interesting because obviously that was like a big flashpoint thing for Democrats and kind of anti Trump sort of a coalition. So yeah, that would probably be the one I would draw on most readily in terms of sizes.
All right. Interesting. And then you, Jared, also loyal listeners to the podcast, there's a good chance they know the name Chris Jones. But for any of listeners who
Kansas City
might not
Chief,
know,
great.
we may be talking about two different Chris Joneses now.
Oh.
Tell us about the one that you wrote about last weekend.
Yes. So this was my morning. My morning was spent hearing about water quality. And Chris Jones is a former University of Iowa research engineer. I know you guys have written about him extensively, and he's written extensively about water quality in the state and the impacts of big ag on that. And he had a lot of criticisms to lobby with data. And one of them was very direct, and it was in our headline on the web. He said, we have to get rid of ethanol. If we're going to improve the environmental condition here in Iowa, we have to get rid of ethanol, which is pretty direct. And part of the reason for that, he said, wasn't just that ethanol production puts a strain on water supplies and it contributes to global warming, which there's research on that you can look up. He noted that it also inflates land prices because the renewable fuel standard increases the price of corn, which in turn raises the price of Iowa farmland to higher and higher levels, which makes it more difficult for younger farmers to break into the industry. So he really kind of like framed that argument in particular on several fronts, not even just on like sort of his particular background with, the environment and water quality and everything like that, which was interesting. And I definitely took note of. And then he also touched on the state's history of kind of modification to different waterways and the impact that that's had. And he said boldly at one point, the Missouri River is the biggest environmental disaster in this country's history. And one of the points he was kind of making is that you had all these modifications that happened on some of the major waterways in the state. And now we don't really use those waterways very much for commerce or transportation. So they were sort of permanently altered, was his point, for something that we don't really do a lot of anymore. So he covered a lot of ground in the event that I was covering.
Yeah, and that reminds me, I meant to ask, and forgive me, I can't recall from your story. What was the event? What was he doing in the Siouxland there?
Yeah, so it was part of like a swing that he made through Western Iowa. He was also down in Council Bluffs talking to people as well for a talk down there. And he was with former Dubuque area representative Chuck Eisenhart was along with him too for both of those events, I believe.
Okay. All right. Very interesting. Moving on, we turn now to the Iowa legislature, where it was a relatively quiet week, all things said, following the second legislative funnel deadline. But while the pace slowed, without a doubt, there was still plenty of noteworthy legislative activity. Go to your favorite Gazette and Leave website to see all our coverage from the week. But among them was a fun one that Maya covered about a unique river activity that I definitely wanted to have her talk about today. Maya, tell us about your story and all about the catfish noodling bill.
Noodling, which is basically, from my best understanding, catching catfish with using your bare hands and feet. You can only use them, can't use any equipment. You basically put your hand in the river, make it kind of like a hook, go near the bottom, kind of the murky bottom where the bigger catfish dwell, and wait until one bites onto your hand, and it's a natural hook. So, and you use your feet to kind of stomp them out of the muck. And it's currently legal mostly along the Mississippi River in those states because it was popularized mostly in the southern U.S. But a lot of folks around the Mississippi do it. It's legal in a lot of states, including Illinois and Wisconsin. Iowa is one of the last states along the Mississippi, along with, I believe, Missouri and Minnesota, where it's not legal. And so they want to change that. They want to create a license for people to go noodling. And within that, you can catch 3 catfish per person. They have to be over 10 inches, and you can't use any equipment. You can't use bait, fins, gloves, any scuba gear. It's it's got to be your grippers,
Yeah.
either on your legs or on your arms. So, but yeah, it was really interesting. It was proposed in the House. It was proposed by Representative Sorensen, who is from Greenfield. Which, first of all, he's never been noodling. Second of all, if you know where Greenfield is, it's not by a lot of major waterways. It's like not bordering any of the major rivers that border Iowa or around any of the lakes in Iowa, major lakes in Iowa. So, but he said that for years, constituents have been coming to him, and particularly this year, there was a family, along with, part of that family was a young teenage girl who is very passionate about noodling. She's been noodling in other states. He said she fell in love with it. And so she's been at the Capitol advocating for this. So maybe she'll be back up depending on where this goes, but I just thought that was really interesting. So folks are excited about this, but on the other end of it, noodling concerns conservationists who say that it can damage or impact catfish spawning. Noodling tends to target bigger catfish, which are what conservationists argue are the type of fish that you want to be passed down in the gene pool. And when you noodle, sometimes they can get either killed or hurt or damaged, and that impacts mating and spawning and stuff like that. And so conservationists are against it just because they don't want it to harm catfish populations for, just the general well-being of catfish, for fishing, sports fishing, all those types of things. So I tried to figure out why it was called noodling, and apparently it's the origins of the name are unknown. But
Wow.
I like the definition most, or the explanation most, where if you wiggle your fingers under the water, they look like spaghetti noodles. So I'm going to go with that one. But a little bit of levity around all the dense budget and tax policy. So
Yeah, absolutely. What was that subcommittee hearing like, Maya? Was there a lot of people at that? Was it just kind of the legislator who, like, did Representative Wolf was there anybody there to speak on it, or did he speak for it?
Well, so there was only one person that testified, and that was someone representing the Iowa Conservation Association.
Yeah, okay.
But Representative Jacoby spoke about his experience noodling, and he didn't sign off on the bill for conservation efforts, but allegedly he was looking for clams. He wasn't noodling, but he has tried to get something latched onto his arm. So he just talked about that. But the two other Republicans on the committee signed off on it and advanced it. Representative Sorensen wasn't there, but me and another reporter were kind of able to catch him and see where this came from. So you're lucky I've only used one fish, but I've been holding stuff.
You reeled him in, huh?
Yeah, we took a deep dive, and it's interesting.
Jared, do you have any ideas? Did anybody ever talk about this on the Missouri River?
Not that I can recall, no. But I was just thinking that if anybody's thinking about going out and doing some noodling on their own after listening to this, you should definitely investigate the water you're in first, because
oh my gosh, please.
Sticking your finger around can you might attract a snapping turtle and get your finger bitten clean off. So just a heads up to anybody that's thinking about doing some noodling now.
Yeah, not to mention any kind of dangerous waters you might not realize you're stepping into. Please consult. Well, not to mention it's illegal in Iowa, so let's start with that. This is just a bill.
But were this to become legal, you want to read up a little bit first.
Yeah, please
Noodle at your own expense.
Noodle at your own peril. Oh man, speaking of denser topics, Tom, if I just say the word property taxes, do you go into the fetal position, or how you holding up? We got, so the backstory there, folks, is we got our second version of the property tax proposal this week, and it's just such a dense topic. It's so difficult to wrap your head around and then be able to report in plain language. And God bless Tom, he's fallen on that sword twice for us now this last month or so. And we're trying to get him hazard pay. Another one I'll just talk about really quick. The legislation that's going to, presuming it gets signed by the governor, and I while I have no intel, I'd be surprised if it doesn't, would expand the cancer coverage in firefighter disability insurance benefits. I know for sure Tom and I have both reported on this as it's gone through the process, and I can't remember if you have too, but regardless here, it's a topic that's had an interesting legislative journey. It's been around the Capitol for a couple of years. Only certain kinds of cancers are currently covered by firefighters' disability insurance. And there's 14 of them, which sounds like a lot, but when you think of all the different kinds of cancers, it leaves out a lot, including a lot of big ones. And so there has been a move to expand that to effectively add any cancer to that list and let any kind of cancer be covered by a firefighter's disability insurance. And it's taken a couple of years. It's one of those interesting ones, because when you describe it to someone, like the first two things you commonly hear, A, shocked that it's not already covered, and B, shocked that it would be difficult to pass a bill to do this. But there's always something. There's always some reason, and in this case, it's the opposition mostly has been over increased cost to either communities like city, local governments, who would have to now cover more ailments, and that's effectively what's kept it from moving, particularly in the Iowa Senate in past years. And this past week, it passed the full Iowa Senate for the first time ever. So it was a big moment. It still has to go back to the House really quick, because they made it a little amendment that's not going to be a big deal. In fact, and just to confirm that, I talked to a key Republican in the House this week to confirm that it's a clerical thing. They'll pass it again and send it, and it'll go to the governor. It's one of those cool moments to cover, because you had a group of advocates, stakeholders that it felt kind of similar to the hands-free driving law earlier, where you had a group of advocates that have some really heartbreaking personal family stories to tell, and to see them, and similarly to that bill that had a hard time getting across the finish line over multiple years, to see them experience that. And there was literally dozens of firefighters in the Senate gallery this week as they watched the debate and the vote take place. Saw some family members holding pictures of their loved ones who they've lost, and a lot of hugs and tears afterwards. So it was a pretty cool one to cover. And like I said, and like Maya said, in a session in a building full of dense and topics and contentious debates, and it's nice to be able to cover stuff like that every once in a while too. Keeps us coming back one more day, even if that may not be the smartest choice in the world. We really should run away. All right. That's going to do it for this episode of On Iowa Politics. Stick around. Sarah Watson couldn't make it. She's got some interesting stories that she worked on this past week that hopefully we can get to on next week's episode. And hopefully Todd's back too. I guess by the time you hear this, it'll be too late. But you and Todd have Pints and Politics on Thursday night in Cedar Rapids, right? And that'll be interesting. Maybe we'll have a little bit of that to talk about. Cedar Rapids Mayor Tiffany O'Donnell's going to be on that one, so that could be interesting. Come back next week if you're not already. Subscribe to us on your streaming service of choice or on YouTube, where you should also smash that like button. You can find the podcast each week as well on your preferred Gazette or Lee newspaper website. Now you've listened to the On Iowa Politics podcast. Make sure you're also subscribed to the On Iowa Politics newsletter, where every morning in your inbox you'll receive all the latest politics and government coverage from our team, and a few very deep-cut movie references that hopefully you'll get and tell me about. You can subscribe to that free newsletter at the Gazette's website, thegazette.com. And lastly, don't forget that the work of everyone you heard here today can be found on the pages and websites of the Quad City Times, Muscatine Journal, Cedar Rapids Gazette, Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, Mesa City Globe Gazette, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and the Sioux City Journal. For Tom Barton, my Marchel Hoff, Jared McNett, and our producer Bailey Cichon, I'm Erin Murphy. Be well, everyone, and be good.